Great. Well, welcome everyone. We can begin our program. My name is Samantha Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of Boston by Foot, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our first virtual program of 2026. So many of you I know are familiar with Boston by Foot, but for those of you who are not, we are a nonprofit organization that got our start in That's right. 1976, 50 years ago this year. And we typically are out on the streets exploring Boston through our guided walking tour program. But in the winter months, when it's not quite as pleasant to be walking the streets of Boston, we are hosting this series of virtual programs so that we can all connect virtually from wherever we are, but generally from the comfort of our own homes. So we've been doing this series every year since the pandemic. So we'll continue at it, and it's just a great way to stay connected and helps us explore more parts of Boston. So tonight, I am very excited because this kicks off not just our virtual series for 2026, but also Boston by Foot's 50th season. And we can think of no better way to do it than by hosting a panel of not just some of Boston by Foot's longest serving volunteers, but our three longest serving volunteers, the longest serving volunteers that we have. And they're an impressive bunch. So I'm very excited to be speaking with them in just a few minutes. But before we get started, I think we can stop sharing the slideshow. Great, perfect. Before we get started, I just want to say a few things. First of all, this program will be about 60 minutes long. We have some planned questions for our panelists, and then of course we want to hear from all of you. I encourage you to enter any questions, comments, anything you'd like into the chat, and we're going to hopefully get to all of the questions toward the end of the program. This program is being recorded, so everybody who has registered will be receiving a link to the recording after the program, and it is also available to our members after the fact. Closed captioning are enabled, so that's something you can turn on or turn off using the Zoom menu on your screen. So please use that if that is helpful to you. And I just ask that everyone remain muted during the panel portion, but then when we get into Q&A, we can, as I said, you can enter the questions into the chat, or if you would like to ask your question verbally, you can raise your hand and we can have you unmute yourself and ask your question of our panelists. So, as I said, we have with us our longest serving volunteers. So I'm very, very excited to introduce Charles Maurer of class of 1977. Harry Friedman, class of 1981, and Sally Ebeling, class of 1983. So collectively, I think we have many, many years of experience and many, many tours and steps and all of the experience of Boston by Foot, from writing tours to leading countless tours, part of training programs and parts of all kinds of committees and exploring Boston and all neighborhoods. So I am very excited to talk to these folks this evening. To start us off, though, I think it would be helpful if we could hear from each one of you just to introduce yourself and just a little bit about your time with Boston by Foot. And so I think we'll start with Charles, who is from our very first class of volunteers at Boston by Foot. So Charles, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little about your time with BBF?
Okay, I've been in Boston since 1972, and I started working in 75. And you're young and you're looking for things to do. And there was an article in the newspaper where the Society of Arts and Crafts was going to sponsor a group giving architecturally oriented walking tours. And everybody's kind of aware of Boston's rich history. But I kind of have an interest in architecture, and I didn't really know anything about it. And it just sounded like it would be something interesting to do.
Great. How about Harry? Can you introduce yourself?
Um,
Talk about your time with Boston by Foot.
sure. I was here for grad school in the late 70s and was out of town for about a year and came back in 1980 and happened to be at Wordsworth bookstore in Harvard Square. And I'd like to say I was standing in the architecture slash history section, but I don't know if that's
It
actually
doesn't really
true.
matter. I'm not presenting.
Mm,
Um, but I met a college friend and a friend of hers who were in Boston by foot, and they said you might be interested in doing this. And so I signed up in the spring of '81, and I think I started doing uh, the Freedom Trail and Beacon Hill. The Freedom Trail I stopped because I couldn't make it last beyond 60 minutes. And Beacon Hill, I eventually sort of got tired. So the next year, I started writing tours of the month. And the first tour I wrote was the Theater District. And I've written or helped to write 8 or 9 what used to be tours of the month, some of which are we still give. And so that's how I started and got involved.
that's great. I think you may be the only one who had trouble filling 60 minutes of Heart of the Freedom Trail. I think most of our guides we have to we have to tell them. But clearly you found what worked well for you. Sally, how about you?
Well, in the fall of 82, I was uh, like hey, Charles, just looking for something to do outside of work. And I was living in the city on Beacon Hill, and I was fascinated by the buildings, but knew nothing about any of it. I came to Boston in July of 76, as a matter of fact. So um, I happen to be in the architectural bookstore now. For those who don't remember this far back, there was a bookstore next to the Boston Architectural Center down in the Back Bay, and there was this little bookstore that they operated. And on the counter of the bookstore, I was there with a friend. I wasn't even interested in architecture, but I was there with a friend, and I was leaning on the counter waiting for him to finish up. And there were these brochures there, and that interested me. And so I picked up one of those. Uh, that turned out to be Boston by Foot. So, and then there's an accompanying story that goes with that. I had just before that seen a tour from my own window that was talking about my building. And that had really confused me because I thought they were talking about things I thought I was the only one who knew. And 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 by the time I got to the window or the door to see who this was, they were gone. And so I thought, oh, well, I don't care. And then in the bookstore, picked up the brochure, said, wait a minute, this could have been the group that was actually there. So it all was incredibly serendipitous, I think, that it came together the way it did. And then that winter, I was I talked to Polly Landsberg, and then I was part of the class of '83. So, and the rest is history.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think we are all very glad for those serendipitous moments. And I think many of the guides today still have those like those BBF connection stories that they can relate to. So thank you so much for sharing that. Actually, my next question is really just to help us to take us back to Boston in the late 70s and early 80s and your first impressions around Boston by foot. But before we get to that, I do want to share this article that Charles was talking about. He mentioned this to me the other day, and I have to say I had to go find it. an article or a column in the Boston Globe, and I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Oh, you have it. You have it. Wonder, did you clip it and save it?
Oh yeah.
I love that so much. Well, for our viewers, I will just quickly share. I hope everyone can see my screen here. It's a column calling for people with sturdy legs and keen minds. So I think that that definitely rings true. A new type of volunteer is being sought in Boston. Someone with sturdy legs, a willingness to study hard, and a love of the city's architecture. So this indeed is the column that you saw, Charles, that brought you to us, and I suspect many others as well. And so take us back to that moment you're reading this, and what is it that's really drawing you in to explore Boston further, and what are some of your first impressions about Boston by foot?
Well, I mean that was the very first year, so there wasn't really anything to know about it because it hadn't previously existed. But for those of us who have known Polly, and I hope there's some people on the Zoom session here, just reading that article, Bill Fripp is quoting this woman who you know nothing about except she's named Polly, and her personality still comes through. She was just, I mean, everybody that knows her, she was just a uh, enthusiastic, cheerful. Nothing ever went wrong. We, well, her motto was that we were always going to step up. Like if the other guy doesn't show up and there's 30 people or 40 people looking to give a tour, why, of course you can do it. She just had this boundless optimism. But again, that first year there wasn't really any structure, and it was a rigorous course with very well qualified instructors, people who taught at local universities and or were practicing architects or had written books about different parts of the city. And then it was also very flexible. Like again, there was no anticipated structure. So if you had an idea and you wanted to write a tour about a particular neighborhood, why go ahead, and then maybe we'd try it out as a tour of the month. And if it was successful, then maybe it evolved into a regular tour. So, and I think another thing that that Polly was almost like a genius with a nonprofit where we're not employees. So it's not like you have some rigid commitment. And she was just very appreciative of whatever you were able to do. Like we know Harry and Sally and I know some people that used to do 80 tours a year. And then there were other of us who, maybe got by on our minimum quota, but she was always very enthusiastic, very accepting. And
But it's all appreciated, right? Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, and who Charles is talking about, our founder, Polly Flansburgh, who I know many of you on this call know very well. And you've described her perfectly, Charles. Always the optimist and just someone who can always just improve every situation by her presence, and suddenly you're doing all kinds of things that you didn't even realize you had agreed to do. She was an amazing director and founder of Boston by Foot, and we hope she will be visiting us. She has now retired to Florida, but we hope she will be visiting us later in the year. We're keeping our fingers crossed. So Harry, Sally, how were your first impressions? What was it like to join Boston by Foot for you?
Um, well, it was a little more structured by the time I joined in 81. I remember you had to go for an interview. Um, Polly always, by the time I joined, there had a number two person who sort of helped her run it. And I think my interview was not with Polly, although I'm not sure, um, but with her number two at the time, who was Peg Body. Um, uh, Polly was a dynamo, but I always really liked Peg. She was a lovely, lovely person, very down to earth. And I spoke to her at the interview. And you know, coming from having recently gone to college and grad school, where you go to these interviews and it's like, are they going to accept me? You know, have I passed the test? To my delight and surprise, I passed the test. I think most people did at the time, and so I got involved, and I think at the time, you know, there were already some preset tours. There were the standard, you know, Beacon Hill, Heart of the Freedom Trail, North End kind of stuff, and like I said, that's what I did my first year, and then sort of decided to branch out on my own, and and again, they were pretty liberal on if you wanted to write a tour of the month, you know, go for it. The only real qualifications was at the time they were really very neighborhood oriented.
Mhm.
So it was a defined geographical area as opposed to anything sort of topical. And so, like I said, when I started doing tours of the month, I did churches of the Back Bay. I did the Theater District. I wrote Bay Village. I wrote a Kenmore Square. I wrote a Fenway. Um, and so they were all very geographically oriented.
Yeah, and it's interesting you both have touched on this balance of structure and flexibility that I think, Boston by Foot we still have, maybe in kind of different ways. And Sally, how about you when you joined? What was your your experience like?
Oh, this is serious talking. I was thinking about one aspect that I hadn't thought about for a long time. After I saw this brochure, I wrote a letter to Polly and asked her about the organization and did they use, what did they do with volunteers? And because the brochure I saw was for the tours for the year of 82. So I was looking to find out exactly what more information about the organization. She, of course, wrote a fantastic letter, very enthusiastic, and so set up an interview. And it was in the winter. I can remember that. It was at the old office was at 77 North Washington Street in her husband's architecture office. And so I went over. It was a Saturday morning, and I think Peg was there as well. However, I had Polly, but what came to the door was Polly and her other assistant, her dog. And I'm looking at this little Scottish terrier going, what is this? Maybe I shouldn't have come here. But fortunately, we got past the dog, who was very friendly, of course, and very enthusiastic. And then we went on with the interview, and yeah, I had much the same as Harry. It was very structured at that time. But for me, Beacon Hill was an emphasis because of where I was living at the time. And so, yeah, it went from there. I didn't go right into, maybe we should clarify that tours of the month were special tours. We had all the regular tours, and then we had one tour every month from May through October that was a featured special tour. And so people who got tired of the regular tours would often advance to writing their own tours. That was the usual evolution. So that was how it all worked out in terms of how things were structured at that time.
Yeah, and so each of you have talked about, what captured you, what brought you in, and mentioning the people, Polly and Peg, who clearly were entrancing in their ways. I'm curious, how did you feel as, like, part of the Boston by Foot community in those early years? What was the community like?
Well, the I think the community I knew best was the people who were in my sort of study group
Mhm.
or class. You met those people first because you saw them every Saturday morning for about 6 weeks. And then there would be a lecture in the morning, and then in the afternoon there'd be, I believe, a walking tour of a certain area. And so I knew those people, and I worked with a couple of them on, again, tours of the month. Um, uh, the others you sort of met. Um, well, again, to me, it was mostly tours of the month because those would be what I would attend when other people were doing something. I mean, I remember um, an early tour of the month was South Boston, which was very, very popular. It got like it was a location that was hard to reach on a Sunday afternoon through public transportation, because I think it was near Dorchester Heights, and the nearest Red Line stations were blocks and
Mhm.
blocks away. Um, but three huge groups of members and tourees. And the part of the problem in those days, and maybe it continues, is that the people who gave the tour didn't actually write it down.
Mm.
So it was given for 2 years in a row, and then a number of those people left. And I don't think we've done the South Boston tour since then because nobody has wanted to research it and actually write it down. But that's how I think I met people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will say we have a new South Boston tour. I didn't even know that there was one that was something you worked on so early. I'll have to like dig around and see if we can find that. But you're right. Yeah, I think a lot of those were were for the moment and didn't get into manual status. But many did. So
Right.
that certainly went to
And
our
I
catalog.
I did not work on it. I was simply
Oh, okay.
in the group that
In
took
the
it.
group you were okay. Okay. Oh, thanks for the clarification. So, um, yeah, Charles and Sally, what were some of your experience in working with some people in the community of Boston by Foot?
Well, yeah, Harry kind of touched on an interesting point where uh, you don't quite know what you're getting into when you join. And then that first 6 weeks, every week you're together with the people that are taking the course, and then you're more together with the people in your breakout group over the lunch hour. And then all of a sudden, after graduation, you only see people if you go on tours or whatever. So for many years, I was a group leader, and that was a nice way to have a more intense involvement. You'd meet all the people that were in that year's class, and they'd know you because they know who the group leaders were. Um, but again, it's an easy organization to belong to, and people join for all different kinds of reasons. And some people just they join for that first year, they fulfill their first year commitment, and maybe they leave town or whatever. And then there's other people that stay around for a long time. But I think the common denominator is that people I've met are just generally pleasant, if not to overuse that word. And when I was a group leader, I would kind of emphasize those qualities where we're not an advocacy group, we're not lobbying for you know any kind of architectural stuff. We're just here to give people a good experience uh, doing walking tours, and then among ourselves, kind of enriching our own experience by uh, going, participating in the group's programs. Okay, Sally, you're up.
As far as community goes, it took time for me. What really made it was because of, as you say, you got out of the group and then you were in with a bigger group, but it wasn't quite. I didn't relate as easily to the whole organization. It was a little bit more difficult, but I think what really did it was, okay, go back to this first tour that I heard outside my building. I was doing tours on a regular basis, and then I was approached, and I can't remember by whom, but they were going to do this tour, this particular tour, the next in '83. They had done it in '82. They were going to do it in '83. The woman who had done it in '82 had left. They needed somebody to do it in '83. Okay, you can see where I'm going here. It eventually I went on the one in '82. I was invited to go on that one. And so I went, and they had this gorgeous tea afterwards at a lovely place. And I was still feeling really not comfortable necessarily with the group. But of course, Polly was there. She immediately introduced me to everyone who was there. And it was not long after that that I experienced the phenomenon Charles was talking about. I think it was Charles who said, you'd say you do something and you'd all of a sudden realize that you'd committed to something and you don't know exactly what you'd committed to, but you knew you were going to do it. So then I really started to develop a relationship with the people I was working with, and it grew from there. And the committees were so helpful, as you say. I was a group leader at one point. I was chair of tour of the month for one point. I mean, that really was, the committees were really, really good at the community aspect. Oh, footprints. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I don't believe you have the copies of that. That was a newsletter that we did. I also did that for a while. And uh, we had people, great people who worked on that. John Heller, who was a legendary guide in from way in the beginning, and he did a lot of the artwork for that. And it was a very formal production. You know, you had to have everything printed, and what everything you had to go through with layout and all of that. That was done every. It was done in the old days before the digital age. So yeah, that was fun. We enjoyed doing that too.
Well, and one feature that I enjoyed was that generally after there'd been a tour of the month, there would be an article in the newsletter based on the tour. So if you miss the tour, okay, you read the article and maybe they'll repeat it next year. And then again, John was in the art department down at Bridgewater State, and he would just sua sponte do these. Well, Donna Herlihy too was pretty artistic, and they would do these nice sort of pen and ink drawings that went along with it.
Mhm.
And then at some point, we were putting out note cards that had those
Yeah.
drawings on them, you know? So,
Yes, yes. Well, well, thank you for all of that. I've had lots of fun going through the Boston by Foot archive, looking at old footprints, and happy to say footprints is revived in a digital format. Very, very different perhaps than from those early years, but definitely in homage to what you all were working on at that point. And I think you touched on a couple things that first of all, I think a lot of what you said will really resonate to guides who even just took our training course last year about how they got involved, how they met people, how they started to build these relationships and bonds that, you know, we all forge in Boston by Foot. And that you also talked about some of the talents that you have from other parts of your life and other experiences you have that you bring to Boston by Foot. It sounds like a lot of your colleagues who did footprints brought that with them, and I still see that today. So I want to shift a little bit. I mean, you have each been with Boston by Foot for over 40 years, and a lot of what you've talked about sounds so familiar to all of us today. But I'd imagine you've experienced a lot of changes in Boston by Foot and in Boston. And so I'd love to know, what are some of the biggest changes that you've experienced as a guide?
Well, I mean, I mentioned that the very first tour of the month I wrote was Theater District, and that was in, I guess, 1982. And so for people who don't know, we have revived the Theater District tour about 2 years ago and now give it on a regular basis. And when I give it now, there are certain parts of Washington Street where back in 1982, I did not have to explain to anybody what the combat zone was. It was obvious. You were standing in the middle of it. It was a very seedy kind of section, and that part of Washington Street between, I guess, Boylston and Neeland was nothing but pornographic movie houses, dirty bookstores, and people on the street that you didn't want to necessarily get too close to. And so now, when we do that part of the tour, I have to explain to people what it was, especially people who weren't around at the time, because it's completely gone. And, it's now a neighborhood where there are student dormitories, there are a lot of restaurants, there are legit businesses, and a number of the buildings that were there that housed these things are literally gone. And there are newer buildings there. So to me, that's been one of the biggest changes in Boston, is that at least that part of the world has become much more, I guess, gentrified, to use that word, although there aren't a whole lot of people living there. But if you had told me in 1982 that I would walk down LaGrange Street and they'd be building luxury condos on LaGrange Street, my head would have exploded. It was beyond the realm of believable.
I'd agree with that. If you're around long enough and see the changes, the very first tour that I wrote was, oh, I don't know, it was a few years after I joined. Might have been 85, maybe. It was uh, um, the Leather District. And never having done any research like that before, research was so different in those days for what you had to do. People like Harry having to go to places and look at actual books and really dig into to papers. It was a whole different approach. And I can remember being kind of overwhelmed by that at the time. The tour came off. It was okay. I thought virtually no more about it. And then 2 years ago, 3 years ago, time flies. At any rate, one of the newer guides, they were all new. But anyway, she wanted to do this tour, revise it. And I don't even know where she got a copy of what we had done originally, but at any rate, she said she was so kind to say, "Do you want to help?" And I said, "I'd like to see what you're doing, but I don't even remember the area. I remember virtually nothing by now. This was many 40 years before, but at any rate, she did a fantastic job. It's a lovely tour,
Mhm.
exists today in its current state, but no resemblance to the neighborhood no longer resembles what it was in that at that time. So it's a complete transformation. But with all the digital resources and everything available to update, to change perspective slightly, it just works really well. And so that to me is it's been great to be able to see how things have evolved in the city itself and with us at the same time.
Yeah.
Another thing
Yeah.
that's kind of been interesting to me is that when we started, we were really the only tour organization in town. And then the Park Service wasn't doing tours. There were no trolley tours. There were no duck boats. And and a number of people that have gone into those tour operations started out with Boston by foot. So uh, Charlie Bainey wrote, I think, a pretty popular book about the Freedom Trail. Charlie Bainey is a Boston by foot person. So I think that's kind of been a challenge for us. Partly we've got a distinguishing identity with our architectural emphasis, but there's a lot of other options out there for people, looking for walking tours. And I've been, it's I think it's been a challenge, but I think we've mastered it with you know, finding new ways to bring our experience to other people. Like I'd like to go on one of those boat tours sometime. That's got to be
Ar-
interesting.
the Boston by Foot architectural cruise.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's definitely you know that we have been able to take so much of the experience that you and so many others have built and bring it to new formats. And I love that you touched on both the theater district and the leisure district because you know, some of our earliest tours, those those are tours that, you know, as you said, Sally, were was revised and is now in the current catalog. And same with Theater District. We now have that as a partnership tour with the Wang Theater. And Harry, you did such a wonderful job updating that, you know, 40 years after you wrote the original. And as you say, it's a very different feel. And yet, I think going back to what you said, Charles, just that, you know, it's our experience, it's the depth, it's you know, this use of architecture as kind of a launch, as a point of departure, a launching point for larger conversations about the stories of the city that really does set us apart. And you know, and despite the fact that there are so many different not just walking tours, but you know, all the ducks and the boats and the trolleys and all those things that we are here 50 years later. And, you know, I'm so proud we are still attracting such wonderful, talented guides. In fact, I'll put a plug right now that we are going to be starting our 2026 volunteer training program in March, and we're starting our interviews for new guides tomorrow. So that's always the best part for me as a staff person with Boston by Foot is meeting people like you 40 plus years later who are still so interested and inspired and excited about exploring the city and connecting with other people who share that passion. So it continues, it continues. And I think you know, despite the changes, it's you've hit a lot of things that are really fast and true here at Boston by Foot. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what Boston by Foot has meant to you personally and how you feel it has shaped you or what you feel you have learned from your experience at Boston by Foot.
Well, Sam, when we were talking about this presentation, uh, you know, every year we have that awards ceremony at the end of the season to kind of recognize what we've accomplished and what people have done. And at one of the major anniversaries, I remember uh, there were a couple of sisters who were in the second class, and and they were kind of just giving a little appreciation speech that it had just kind of changed. You know, it wasn't necessarily like life changing in capital letters, but it was kind of a life changing experience where now you walk by a building and you see those little decorations down the side of the corners, and you think those are pilasters,
Mhm.
you know, and you notice things that you never really noticed before, but now because now you kind of understand their significance in identifying a particular style, and you can go to other cities and you can kind of translate that to other cities, and it just kind of gives you a greater appreciation for the built environment.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd always been interested in the architecture and the history, so BBF sort of gave me a more formal foundation for it, which was nice, and the opportunity to research some of this stuff. Um, the research, like Sally sort of mentioned, you know, we I worked on a lot of tours before there was anything called the internet, and
Mhm.
you had to literally go to libraries and get landmark studies and everything and scribble down notes in order to research anything. Where I found it sort of useful in my other life, um, I'm a member of Brookline Town Meeting for the last 20 something years. And Brookline Town Meeting meets on multiple nights, twice a year in the spring and the fall. And I often have to give a speech before 250, 300 people. And I really do think that having to give the tours, obviously before much smaller groups, has really been a considerable help. It's made me much more comfortable as a public speaker. Um, I still get pretty nervous doing it, but I think I hide it. And doing the tours where you're talking to, you know, three, four, five to 15 to 20 people has been good practice, and I think has made me a more comfortable speaker and enabled me to do stuff, you know, outside of BBF where I have to speak.
For sure.
Well, for me, it's been most of my life, my adult life. And it was so important because it formed a real community for me. And
Mhm.
as Charles said, the people are pleasant, they're interesting, they're interested, they're just a joy to be around. And it's expanded my own perspectives. It's encouraged me to be more observant, as Charles said, mentioned, and just to constantly encourage my curiosity. It's so much of it is just one question, and then you get an answer to that, and that brings up several more questions, and you end up down many rabbit holes. But they're usually pretty interesting places to be, and you're always with other people who are having coming up with even more questions. So it's been a large part of my existence as a whole.
Yeah. No, and I think all of those things are things that many of us feel and things that we have gotten from our time with Boston by Foot. So let me ask you this. Why do you think what we do matters?
I think it's kind of summed up in a quote I was when we were talking about this earlier about this issue. It's the old adage that comes to my mind is those who don't understand history are destined to repeat it. And we are really making an effort. Well, we have reached a point, I think, where we are considered good sources, that we're not making up things. And if we are, we say it is believed that, or it is reported that, so you clarify your perspective, and yet you're giving people reasonable information to work with so that they can form their own opinion. We're not giving them, as Charles said, we're not giving them opinions. We're just giving them that which they can work with. And I think we have a reputation for being, solid about our evidence and our opinions. And I think that's what I want to do. I want to be able to communicate that to
Mhm.
people.
I think I'll also, again, I'll sort of concentrate on the architecture.
Mhm.
Um, I did a tour for a couple years, basically Old Scully Square and the Old West End,
Mm.
which I can't do anymore because the Mass General has torn down all the old West End buildings that had remained after the tear down. But the tour, when you show people those parts of town, it's sort of a reminder, don't let this happen to you, because they were major architectural urban planning blunders that in the case of the West End were really never rectified. But there are other tours we do where you could point out where the central artery used to be, and now it's a park, and the city was stitched back together again, and it was a real good progress. So I think again, sort of what Sally was saying, you know, showing people what happened in the past, because if they don't know what happened in the past, they're ill-equipped to go forward to the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Charles, is there something that What is it that strikes you with the question? Why does this work matter? You've been at this longer
Well,
than.
it's interesting to see. It's interesting to hear what Harry and Sally said,
Yeah.
because I think in a lot of ways we're experiencing the same thing and maybe interpreting it a little differently. But um, kind of thinking about Sally there, like we're not really in the entertainment business. We're we're educational, but at the same time we're trying to do it in a way that people are going to enjoy it. You know, they're going to come away with it not just with some uh, you know stories, but you know actually knowing more than they did before they took the tour. And then I think we have a really solid reputation. So, there's a lot of, niche type tour organizations and they're maybe much more seasonal than we are, but we're there pretty much all the time. And, large organizations have a reunion in Boston or they're having a convention in Boston or something, and they're looking for something for the spouses to do. And we're there. How many people do you need? How big a tour do you want? What would you like to see? And we can deliver on that. So uh, I think it's just a good, solid organization that is providing a good product.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you. And I'm seeing some questions come in and thank you. Please keep them coming. But I guess I just have one last question for our panel before I open it up to questions from the group. And as I said, I have a very full day tomorrow of interviewing new potential guides. And so I'm wondering, when you think about the future and incoming guides and the future of Boston by Foot, what excites you the most?
I think the fact that it's successfully been going for 50 years and isn't really slowing down and is looking to the future. And I know we did some reframing over the last couple of years as to how we get to the future,
Mhm.
but I think there is a future. And the fact that you're still recruiting guides and there's still plenty of people interested in leading these tours and doing the work and doing the research, I think is all very promising. 50 years is that's a lifetime, and I think it says something that we're still going strong.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting that because we are a volunteer organization, we get people that in their, 9 to 5 life have different skill sets. And I'm kind of excited about the way we've evolved with the new technologies. Like if we were a for-profit organization, we might not be able to hire some of these people to do work for us. But I think our website is pretty impressive. Uh, and the artwork on the website, the photography and everything. Um, I think we've and shoot, Sam, during the pandemic when nobody could do anything and you were putting together those Zoom programs that you could kind of tune into and keep in touch.
Yep. Mhm.
Uh, like I say, we've got an interesting topic, and I think we've been doing a good job bringing that into the new technologies.
Continuing to adapt always.
Well, that's the key, I think, to being able to move successfully into the future is the ability to do to do the kind of pivoting that has been done recently, and at the same time keep in mind what has worked in the past and continue to make sure that we attract people that are the same as we've always attracted, the ones that are really part that will be a solid part of the organization.
For sure. Yeah. as we say, it's always it's, you don't need the experience or the education. It's the passion and the curiosity and the enthusiasm. And that is, I think what we certainly have felt tonight. And I know I will feel tomorrow as I interview the potential new guides. Um, so thank you. And as I said, I see some great questions coming in. Please go ahead and put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, if you want to ask any questions of our panelists verbally, please do. I will call out, there's a couple just follow-ons from things that we had talked about. Michelle Steinberg, another longtime guide, invites anyone to join her in an architecture cruise. She's one of our architecture cruise guides who loves that tour, and it starts Memorial Day weekend and will go through mid-October. That's a tour that we offer in partnership with the Boston Society for Architecture and the Charles River Boat Company. So yeah, so glad you're excited about that, Michelle. We'll be out there. And Sharon inviting everyone the South Boston Broadway tour. So we are in South Boston and a different with a different lens perhaps than that tour that you took many years ago, Harry. And I will also put a plug, I guess, that we have tours in almost every Boston neighborhood. Almost. We still have to get to a few, and really hoping we're able to get to all Boston neighborhoods by the time the city hits its 400th birthday in 2030. So we just got a couple more years to go. So just something to keep in mind for all of you who I know are eager to write new tours. But a great question here, and it's a couple different versions of it. But what is it your all-time favorite tour to give?
What was the question again?
All-time favorite tour to give or to lead.
Well, mine, I'll toot my own horn. Mine is the theater
Go for it.
district. It's been through a number of iterations. Where I've tried to, in the early, before we revamped it 2 years ago, it was not just theaters, but, sort of contributing buildings. And I think the first year we did it, it was sort of vanilla. I think the second year I did it, I picked a date in 1953 and was telling in each of the venues what was playing, either as a movie or a play. That wasn't as exciting as I thought. On the most recent iteration, um, we have stories at several of the stops that tell the history of theater in Boston and some anecdotes. So I think frankly, that's my favorite.
Well, I really enjoy that tour too, and that's another one we'll be offering a number of times this season. So if you haven't taken Theater District yet, you will have some good opportunities to do so this year and hopefully well beyond.
Well, you know the answer to the question from me, Sam, but uh,
I
starting
think
out, we
I
just had two tours, the Heart of the Freedom Trail and Beacon Hill. And Beacon Hill, it's a Federalist building, but it has a Greek revival porch that they added. You know, I just, Beacon Hill was way over my head. But the Heart of the Freedom Trail, it was a very nice comparison of different centuries and different styles. And so I enjoyed that quite a bit. And again, our early tours were fundamentally architectural. And then at one point, just for fun at the very end of the year, Donna Hurley decided let's do a Beacon Hill Halloween tour. And that became almost like a cult. And Sally and I did Beacon Hill on Halloween for many years. And I highly recommend it to anybody because you walk around Beacon Hill and it's very quiet and very, sedate. But on Halloween, they close the streets off, and it's almost like Boston's version of Mardi Gras, water a Boston version of,
Boston version, right?
and people have their doors open to hand out candy. You can kind of peek inside the houses. It's just a lot of fun. Uh, I can't tell you.
Yes, it is quite an experience. And yes, we continue. Beacon Hill with the Boo. It's one of the highlights of the year. It continues to be.
Well, I go back to the first tour that I heard here outside my window. Then I evolved to doing that tour in '83. That tour eventually became what is now the I can't remember its current name, Hub of Literary
All of Literary America,
America.
yes.
Okay. Anyway, that uh, that has been the one thread that has run through the entire my entire stay, and it's been what I identify with more than any other tour. I have to comment on Charles on the first Beacon Hill with the Boo tour. Charles came. None of us had ever, we didn't even know who it that had showed up. He was wearing his Donald Duck costume, which he had made. He's actually a very good woodworker and costume maker, as it were. And the duck head fit over his head and had the beak. And you really could not tell who it was. It was quite the it attracted quite a lot of controversy among the guides at that point. It was like, who's that? So, and that costume that just went on for years, and it was truly a legend in its own time. So,
And continues. Actually, Sheridan has a comment here that she's always loved your costume on Halloween. And I have to say, you're even featured when we do introduce new guides to Boston by Foot. We share with them some photos and some experiences, and there is indeed a photo of you, Charles, getting ready for Beacon Hill with a Boo in your costume, not Donald Duck, but the Headless Horseman. And one of the things that we always tell incoming guides is that, sometimes we hear, or, people ask us if they have to wear a costume if they're going to lead tours of Boston. And we say, no, no, no. But there is one night a year where it's encouraged, not required, but encouraged. And yeah, I always love to see what our creative guides come up with on Halloween.
well,
Well,
it's a high bar he set. So
Right, right.
you have to sort of be gracious about things. But as I said, when the organization started, for many years I was a group leader training people. And then I was a committee chairman. And then I was on other committees, at one point, like all the group leaders were people that had been in my group, more or less. Then time passes, and after a gap of about 10 years, oh, it's Donald Duck, you know?
That's
But,
how you're
and
known.
then, you know, we all love Polly, but she got a great deal of amusement out of describing me as the world's oldest docent. And this was even when I was in my 40s, maybe. Now maybe the title fits, but it was all in good fun. But because if I ever leave, Harry, you're next in line, I think. So get ready, pal.
Well, so thank you all for questions. Just a few minutes left. And actually, Joanne, well, I will say you have a lot of fans in the audience. I've seen several comments coming through here about how much it's guides and members and people who have taken your tours over the years and how much they have learned and how much they have really truly appreciated all that you have given to them, to us, to Boston by Foot. So we thank you, thank you. Um, and Joanne is asking, it is the 50th anniversary a year of Boston by Foot. Will there be any special tours? Well, yes, the answer is absolutely. But as the 50th year of Boston by Foot, it's also the 250th anniversary of America, because of course we got our start because of the American Bicentennial celebrations in 1976, and now in 2026 we are selling 250 years of American democracy. Um, so, I think we really evolved in a lot of ways about thinking about the regular tours and the special tours and all of that, but there will definitely be a wide range of tour options, and there will be many that focus on some of the Revolutionary era for sure, as well as some of the specialty tours that offer some extra material around it in Washington's footsteps, for example. about George Washington's visit to Boston, Ben Franklin, son of Boston, other founding father that we can claim. And then we also have a brand new tour that actually was developed last year, kind of in response to the questions around why do what we do, and how can we help people truly grasp all of these complex concepts of American history. And a team of volunteers have put together a new tour called Toward a More Perfect Union, which brings us through so many familiar sites of Boston, but really puts a lens on it around, what are the stories here that connect to some of the fundamental rights and principles of American democracy that we respect and need and need to continue celebrating today. So that's another tour that will be offered this year in honor of Boston by Foot's 50th, but in honor of America's 250th. So we hope you will all join us for that and the many, many other tours that we will be offering this year, of course. As I said, we're just kicking off our virtual program series now. So just about every week for the next 8 to 10 weeks or so, we'll have a virtual program. One actually will be in person. So please do check our calendar to join us for those, to stay connected this winter. And I really do. Oh, and as I said, we're interviewing you guides starting tomorrow. So if there's anyone in the audience that has thought about becoming a Boston by Foot guide and hasn't yet, now is your chance. So please do consider becoming a guide, or maybe passing along this application to others in your life who are like our panelists tonight and love exploring and learning. And so I thank everybody for joining us this evening, and I especially want to thank our panelists, Harry, Sally, Charles, our longest serving docents, the OLD, oldest living docents. We really, really appreciate you and respect you, and thank you so much for your time this evening, and of course, all that you have given to us over the years that you have been with Boston by Foot. So thank you and good night
Thank
to
you,
all.
Sam. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.